Today I want to talk about what real acceptance actually is. So acceptance is one of the most common teachings in spirituality and psychology. I hear it everywhere, and I hear people say it a lot. They're saying things like just accept things as they are, or maybe acceptance is the key to peace, or just stop resisting reality. So really acceptance is a decision to go with the flow of our true self and allow life to be how it currently is. And overall, it's an attempt to end our own inner conflict. So we normally want acceptance because something inside of us feels uncomfortable. We might feel disappointed, we might feel sad, there might be hurt, fear, loss of control. There might even be the urge to throw your phone against the wall. So a lot of the times when we feel like that, people say, just accept things as they are. So we try to practice that acceptance, but then when we do that, we often feel more frustrated or more resistant than even before. And we become disconnected from our true self then too. Because we think to ourselves, if I can just accept this, then I'll finally feel at peace. And while that motivation makes sense, it also sets up a trap. Because instead of meeting the emotional discomfort where we are, we try to accept the situation while rejecting our inner response to the situation. And that's not really true acceptance. That's fake or forced acceptance. It's the kind where you say, I accept this, but internally muttering, I absolutely hate this, I can't stand it. Why do I have to put up with this? And I know this because I've seen lots of people do it, but I know myself, I've done it many times before. So I know earlier in my life when something painful would happen, I would tell myself, I can't change it, just accept it as it is. There's nothing more I can do. And on the surface, it sounded really mature and even spiritual, like that's when I was starting my spiritual teachings and learnings. And it's the kind of things I'd imagine like a calm monk saying to me on a mountain somewhere. But internally, something very different was happening for me. So I was telling myself I should be okay with this situation, while simultaneously telling myself I shouldn't feel what I was feeling. For example, if a relationship ended or something I cared deeply about didn't work out, I would just say to myself, that's fine, I can't change it, that's life, just accept it as it is. But underneath that statement was a lot of frustration for me, sadness, and sometimes anger. And I wasn't allowing myself to feel it by pushing it down. I was actually suppressing it with my attempts to accept. So while my version of acceptance looked calm on the outside, inside there was a lot of tension and tightness, and it started to build. And that building came up as resentment, and resentment towards life. And that's because I wasn't really accepting properly. And what I was doing, I was overriding or bypassing my emotions. And that kind of acceptance feels like grinding out gears, but without any lubrication, or shaving with no cream. It's friction, strain, and discomfort. So the reason accept things as they are often fails is because when we try to accept a situation without changing our perception or allowing our emotions, we stay stuck with it. The mind says, the reality is okay. That's what our mind says. But our emotions say, no, this is not okay. I hate it. It shouldn't be like this. So what happens is we get an internal split. One part of us is trying to be wise and composed, and the other part of us feels ignored and neglected. And the ignored and neglected part doesn't disappear. It sort of tightens, it gets more resistant, and it grows stronger. And this is why when people say, I've accepted it, but you can really see deep down that their emotional responses are not accepting at all. Their words are saying one thing, but their emotions are saying something else. And their emotions really reveal the truth. That acceptance hasn't really actually happened. So there's a key insight here in acceptance, and it's the thing that is that we don't actually have to accept the situation itself. So in order to practice true acceptance, what we want to do is accept our emotions about the situation. Because if we had no emotional response, there'd be nothing to accept. We don't need to accept breathing. We don't need to accept the color of the sky. We don't wake up in the morning and say, today I'll bravely accept the oxygen that I breathe. Because these things cause no emotional resistance, then they don't actually trigger us. But when something happens that makes me feel sad or makes us feel sad or angry or disappointed, then acceptance of that emotion may be what's really called for. Because acceptance really only becomes relevant when there is resistance. And resistance is really our habitual response to a lot of our unpleasant emotions. So what I eventually realized for myself was that the discomfort I had was not coming from the situation. The discomfort was my emotion and the relationship to my emotion about the situation. So while I was trying to accept life, I was really rejecting my feelings. And real acceptance began the moment I stopped telling myself I should be okay and instead said, it's okay to feel sad right now. It's allowed. It's okay to feel disappointed. I notice it. I notice the sadness. I notice the frustration. They're okay to be felt. Not as something to analyze, not as something to fix. Just as something true in this moment. And the thing was, when I did this, the moment I allowed the emotion to be without judgment, the situation felt lighter. And I felt lighter about the situation. So nothing externally had changed. The same situation still existed, but my inner relationship had changed to the situation and to the emotion. It was the acceptance of the emotion, not the circumstances. And that's where true acceptance starts. Not with the story, not with the situation, but with permission to feel what is present right now without labeling it as bad, wrong, or a weakness. And when you meet your emotion this way, it no longer needs to scream for your attention. And it will generally soften, we'll soften around it. And from that softness, we can begin to consciously choose a different, lighter way to perceive the situation. And once the emotions are allowed and no longer being resisted, the mind becomes far more open to doing this. And in that openness, we're no longer reacting automatically. We can start to choose how we interpret what's going on. So I could begin to see that a situation could be painful without being wrong. I could see that it was uncomfortable without being personal. My perception was that maybe it's disappointing, but it's not a reflection on my worth. I wasn't trying to force positive thinking here. What I did was a deliberate shift in my perception. And that shift only became possible once the emotional resistance had softened. The situation itself hadn't changed, but the lens through which I was viewing it had. And when my perception is consciously aligned with peace, rather than defense or acceptance, then my acceptance and peace comes up naturally. So my true self doesn't demand that I don't feel what I do feel. It's okay, it knows that. It doesn't bypass the emotion. It includes it in the whole experience. But from this place, acceptance feels like openness rather than struggle. We can still be present, we can still care about things, and we can still act when needed, but we're no longer fighting the reality internally. And that saves us a lot of energy and a lot of suffering, because fighting reality is a full-time job, and the reality is the thing that's always going to win. So next time you hear someone say, just accept things as they are, or you can't change it, just accept it, just pause and ask yourself, how do I feel about this situation? Can I begin to make peace with these emotions? And once that emotion is allowed, it's then easier to shift your perceptions to more peaceful perceptions, lighter ones. And when your perceptions shift, acceptance is no longer something you do, it's something that happens naturally without trying. And that's what real acceptance is.